Non-destructive self-reentry. Okay.
I have help.
Wait, one second. One second. So we have this camera operator here. I told him 2 minutes. Ah, yes. We're on. Appreciate. We're waiting for CNN now. Okay, 3, 2, 1. So this lecture is entitled The Real Holy Grail Lineage, the Eternal Golden Braid, a short history of alchemy, Thoth, Hermes, Ningishida, David, Ishka, Viracocha, Quetzalcoatl, same person, and the history of the ET colonization of Earth, Enki, Osiris's Adam Kadmon project to create Ensoulment on Earth, to braid that together. That's the title here. And since it's about alchemy implosion and the Grail, Dan Mack has a short message. He's got the real Grail cup in his hand.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening to me babble on over these days. But what I have here, I did not make this. This was made by somebody that watched a Fractal U Zoom class this year. His name is Guillermo, and he lives in Uruguay. So he couldn't.
This was the shape right here. That's the shape right there. That's it.
This cup is made. First of all, it's clay that has a 10% quartz content.
3D fractal.
And it also has the paint on gold, like for not plating, but that you can paint on something, and which is underneath this glaze, okay? And it's very fractal. And I just brought these, presented them to Dan. Guillermo had me do that, but these are very energetic. Guillermo does sound healing with tune forks, and he did it. I got a chance to get some of his tuning healing in Seattle when he came to Seattle, and then went back home, and I've since then had other healing sessions with him. It's always through Zoom on the iPad. And he said, well, why don't you, do you have Dan's cup? I said, well, yeah, I haven't seen it yet. He said, so while the healing session didn't start with the cup, but I really had some blockages, and he says, well, why don't you take the cup and put it on your heart? And right away, the healing just exploded into my heart. So the fractality of this, I have 3 more for sale over there. They are not like this, but they are the same design. They just don't have the gold in them. They have the quartz and everything else. But this truly proves the Grail fractality. This cup does. And he was inspired to make it by Dan's... Yeah.
It's that, literally, exactly that, by equation. That's what it is.
I mean, if you look at it, there's more over there. Yeah. I only have 3. They are 25 euros a piece. What's left? I mean, whoever would like one, anyway. Maybe I might have to draw numbers. Maybe I can draw numbers. I'm sorry.
We'll get some more. We'll get some more, and also Tufan is going to help share them, I think. Okay. So it's all good.
Anyway,
wonderful.
That's really all I have to say. There are... the gold, so there is alchemical principles in this cup, as well as the scientific fractality. Anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan, for bringing the Grail. Dan brought the Grail to Grail country. It's all good. So the idea here, remember we were talking about how it was that we called this alchemy and the science of consciousness. And now we know that consciousness is caused indirectly, directly by perfected charge collapse, fractal conjugation. And that brings us to the story of the Holy Grail. Now, the interesting thing is how that is identical in many ways with the history of alchemy on this planet. And that is identical in many ways with the history of Thoth, Hermes, Ningishida, Quetzalcoatl, Viracocha, same person. And that is identical, in fact, with the ET colonization of Earth. So the challenge is if we can tell that story in a few minutes flat. So here is the big picture when the Empire strikes back. So actually there was a colony called the Anak Empire, later called Anunnaki, and whose alphabet literally today we call Sumerian. And the Anak sent their favorite son, guy named Anu. That might seem familiar if you've seen the heart of the sun, the heart of the human, and the heart of hydrogen, that Anu. Well, that was the name of sun god in this case, the patriarch at that time. Well, he was a young whippersnapper at this point, early in the story. Anyway, so he arrives in our galaxy. He's just been assigned by his wealthy family. They own a lot of galaxies, actually, they do. So when he got here, he was doing pretty good with his magic lady and their primary son, Enki, Ea, for whom Earth was named, was powerful. However, he got sucked in. You know how he got sucked in? The Draco Empire, later called the royalty of Draco, called Siakar, they offered him the biggest stargate in our galaxy as a bribe in order to marry a Draco queen. Oh, a little ego problem here. This is the biggest stargate in our galaxy. It's called the trapezium, and it's a cube, literally, which is exactly how you must arrange lasers if you'd like to phase conjugate, called four-wave mixing. But the amount of mass in this cube makes it the best implosion device for embedding further into the longitudinal array. So if you got to go a million galaxies down the light waves, you need a big stargate. And so wars generally are over the stargate. Later we're going to call that Uru, meaning stargate, or ancient Draco blood, Uru as in Uru Asa LM, Jerusalem. The war is over the stargate. Uru means portal, Asa means queen of, L means the place of the phase shift, translation of vorticity, transverse to longitudinal. Would you like to be an Elohim today? So the L is a name for the physics of the principle that in your biology you can convert, implode, transverse to longitudinal, and thus have a soul. And that's what our lecture today is about. So shortly after Anu got sucked in, their next son, actually by artificial insemination, because I don't mean to be personal, but these Dracos, they were ugly. Well, just anyway. But so it wasn't actually a biological conception. But let's just say the next son, otherwise named his name really originally, but his name was Enlil, later on this planet called Yahweh. And Yahweh was raised Draco, even though he had half Anak blood. And then he became the bossy brother of the family. Meantime, the Anak Empire, a little problem, they're having atmosphere problems and they got to get some gold powder. The physics of how gold powder achieves atmosphere maintenance is called charge implosion, actually. Because this is called planet taming, that if you tame a planet, which example of planet taming, if you place the gravity diodes, which we today call pyramids, at the nodal array like this on a planet, you stabilize gravity and atmosphere by increasing the implosion, and that is the way to stabilize gravity and make and contain atmosphere. This was one of the skills of Thoth, Ishka, Ningishida, Hermes. So when the family assigned Enlil to come and do the gold mining in the solar system, the rest of the family knew, we got trouble here. And so they sent the other brother, Ea, later we called Atun, for whom Earth was named, later named Osiris. They sent him along, the brother. But they also knew that he was going to need a protector. And the protector was named Ishka, who we later called Hermes Thoth Ningishida, whose job title at that point was the alchemy teacher for Enki Ea. Now we should credit here, I have many sources for this story. Some are intuitive. I've studied Anton Parks and others for years. I knew the Hopi teachers very well. But the biggest part of this part of the story, we want to credit Elena Danan, who we found very useful in describing this history. We're grateful to her. And so this part about Ishka's original function, we credit Elena Danan for many things. And I've taught many videos with her. So anyway, when they got here, of course, there was trouble. Enlil Yahweh, he had a classic Draco motivation. Draco are by nature parasitic. And one of the reasons they're parasitic is because in the process of losing long-term memory and losing what we would call a soul, if you don't have your own source of bliss, Your only access to charge is from others, basically. So essentially, if you don't have a source of bliss, you are, by electrical definition, a parasite. And this is perfectly descriptive of the Draco at that time. Now, a little history on that. There's a book called the Taluna? No, I get it right. In which the history of the Draco is discussed in French. It's called the Thiuba. Thiuba, for whom we think became Yehovah. And they came from Thuban in Draco, which is not just the home of Dune and the dragons, it's the home of the Draco. Hello, at that time. Anyway, at that time the Draco were androgynous. But then by beginning to reproduce sexually, it accelerated their evolution, but there was a problem. The war of the sexes began. Oh yeah. We later call this the Orion Queen Migdal, for whom Magdalene was named, actually. And the Orion Queen Mag of that time were known to be highly psychokinetic, and that culture, Draco, was a matrilineal. It's critical to know this because when Enlil Yahweh came here and set up the Jewish religion, as in most religions on earth, all those religions began with fear of women. And since this was my study in graduate school, the origin of fear of women on earth, that was my subject. And after many years of knocking my head on a wall, I found out the origin of fear of women on earth is off of earth. That's the basic thing you need to know. Anywho, so when they got here, Enlil Yahweh was actually called Satam, their word for territorial administrator, our word for Satan, actually. And then there followed, many thousands of years of a war between the brothers. Most of you know that a big part of that story, of course. Major events in that story include when Enlil decided the sound of humans copulating was so loud at night that he had to direct an asteroid this way to wipe out the humans. And he almost did. That was how the Lesser Dryad, the biggest flood in the history of the planet, happened, actually. Enki tried to talk him out of it, but hell no. And parallel to that event was the sinking of Atlantis, which at that time was called Thule, Tehuti, another name for Thoth. And Tehuti was pronounced another way at that time, TWT, which then became abbreviated DWD, which is the origin of the Hebrew notion of the line of David. So everywhere they say line of David, they mean kids of Thoth. And the descendants of Thoth include, for example, Magdalene, Jesus, and the Grail story directly. For example, when when Akhenaten basically changed his name to Moses and became a gold powder cook, which is alchemic. The lineage of Moses becomes the royal family of the Essenes, the righteous priest, and the royal descendants of that family are called Jesus and Magdalene, actually. So later, when I worked for many years with the famous William Buhler Templar original source, his group, Maya Temple Doors, they explicitly were directly in communication with Thoth for decades. And the communications were very in-depth. You can see the star maps at goldenmean.info/Buhler, Buehler, William Buhler, who was the famous Templar. So this group, for example, they were teaching the Templar agenda of the repair of the fabric of time. And what they meant by that was the fact, for example, that places like Montauk and Philadelphia tore a rip in the fabric of time, the implosive magnetic of Earth, causing a hole in the aura, which invited parasites, like Dracos and Greys. Oh my. So now we obviously don't have time to do that whole story, but I want to merge that story now into the history of alchemy. So you kind of see in the threads of that story the basic outline that what we call the Grail bloodline is the bloodline of Thoth and Enki, who was called Osiris at that time. And their agenda, let me give you an example. If you read Secret Places of the Lion by Brother Philip George Hunt Williamson, also named Michael D. Abramovich, not his pen name, he traces the bloodline of Tutankhamun and Pope Leo XIII. And I had, I won't say a reincarnation, but a fragment of the soul memory of And that's how some of this came to me, actually. But what he described was, at the time when they planned for the incarnation of Tutankhamun, which the Syrians and the advanced lineage, the Syrian mother of Enki, had been involved with for hundreds of years. They planned the bloodline for hundreds of years of who was Tutankhamun. They did. And similar to the way the Dracos planned the bloodline of the royal families of Europe for 1,000 years, like we do show dogs. And what were they trying to cook up? Humpty Dumpty. Humpty Dumpty's egg had a great fall, and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. And what the egg of Humpty is a soul. So you can make as many royal bloodlines as you want, but if you don't know how to make a soul, and that was the difference between Enki's Atun side of the family versus Enlil Yahweh Amun side of the story. The Atun Amun was the name for that conflict in Egypt, for example. So this agenda of the Templar, which they inherited directly from Thoth, for ensoulment on Earth, and the agenda to repair the fabric of time, was that the grid of Earth, which you can see hundreds of maps there, that link I just gave you, needed to be made more fractal, like the Grail cup, obviously. And the skill to make the grid fractal and atmosphere maintaining was something that Thoth, Hermes, Ningishita practiced all over the galaxy, okay? So when the Earth ended up with a Schumann cascade, which is perfect almost by equation to a phase conjugate pump wave, hello, that exact wave shape is how you make a fire crystal out of quartz. It's how you make bliss out of DNA. It's how you make a soul. It's how you pump a pyramid to make the longitudinal waves called global wireless power. That's why the pyramids are called the Hummer. It's the same wave. And who had the skill to make that? Hermes, Thoth, Ningishita, the original alchemist. Yeah. So now, if in terms of the history of alchemy, just another little piece. You know, when Peter the Hermit was able to sell to the royal families of Northwest Europe the bonds which became the First Crusade, the way Peter the Hermit, who was basically a hippie, and we credit this part of the story to Teresa Burns, the expert on John Dee and Kelly and their alchemy. But Peter the Hermit was able to sell the rich families of France on the Grail quest, the First Crusade, because he just came back from Jerusalem, Uru Asa Elim, and they were making gold. Vincent Bridges, one of our teachers on this, he was absolutely convinced that most of the gold in Egypt was alchemically produced and not mined, actually. And others have studied this. This is not new information, actually. But how were they making gold in Egypt? What was Peter the Hermit doing? Peter the Hermit, in Jerusalem, he was hanging out with the guy that was called the Mad Caliph. You know how he went mad? I will tell you. So at that time, the alchemists often ate their philosopher's stone because they would like to be immortal, you would know. And what was their philosopher's stone at that time? It was the Kaaba stone of the Muslims, Lucifer's eye. Lucifer was part of Enki's family, the son Marduk, complicated story, but anyway. Lucifer's eye was a glass meteorite that became the Kaaba stone. And as we explained the other day, I think I mentioned this the other day here, that when the only metal that can survive in the center of a glass meteorite is the platinum group metals, palladium, platinum, gold, and when that's vaporized into a bubble array foaming like a sponge in the glass, you have the ultimate dielectric. The ultimate dielectric provides the capacitance permissively to distribute charge collapse from mercury to gold, for example, and which is only one electron. It's actually really, and there's a phonon component sometimes. But actually, so the Mad Caliph was grinding up the Kaaba. At that time, documented in history, about 1/3 of the mass and volume of the Kaaba stone is documented to have disappeared. What happened to it? Well, some of it they ate. And how did the Mad Caliph get to be called mad? Take a guess. So that powder, later called the red powder, projective powder philosopher's stone, which was the red powder used by Flamel and John Dee and Kelly, when they made the purest gold ever measured by the British Royal Society. And the physics has to do with that if you have that super dielectric inside a cup, there may be a phonon component of the right temperature, and the cooling is alchemic. And by the way, there's a critical temperature if you know Joe Champion's work. Critical temperature, isotope transition critical temperatures. Anyway, you get the charge collapse named alchemy, isotope transition, fusion, non-destructive compression, implosion, and that's the physics of that transmutation process, actually. So they had, of course, Vincent claimed to remember in detail, and I heard him tell those stories, in detail, the lifetime of Flamel and Kelly with D. Vincent claimed that I was D. I don't actually know if I was John D, but certainly a fragment of the soul memory is somewhere in there. I don't take reincarnation quite that literally. It's good. But in my experience, I tend to prefer to call it fragments of soul memory. And like when I went to Egypt, I had a swoon experience in the gold sarcophagus of Tutankhamun. And everything I had just read about the Tutankhamun Grail line, it was like, I fainted there actually. And so, but I know dozens of people who earnestly believe they were Akhenaten, dozens of them actually. So this is why I say fragment of soul memory. Point being that what transcends the temporalness of incarnation is pure principle. So I tell you, if that you know how to think and visualize these things as pure principle, as pure wave function. For example, the origin of sacred alphabets are simple, pure wave functions, symmetric. Then you live forever because you're inhabiting a principle that lives forever. So in ancient times, the name and the shape and the service are one. You know what that means. You are the pure principle you inhabit. The name is simply, like Daniel, for example. Dan, the L from An, E-L, An, Anu, sun god, and all these names are. So point being that now we have a little background for the history of alchemy and Thoth on this planet. And now the slideshow is going to get us into a little bit of the technologies that result directly from this Hermetic caduceus skill. Remember, we believe that the term caduceus in physics is most accurately described as phase conjugation. That's what a caduceus is. So if anybody on this planet is teaching something hermetic, a caduceus, well, I suppose that might be me. I'm not claiming the whole story, but I'm claiming that if you want to learn the physics of what the caduceus was good for, we're actually studying phase conjugate pump waves and fractality. So there's two slideshows that now follow that intro. One is UR 9, slide number 60. Slide number UR 9, slide number 20. One moment, here we go. Slide number 20 here, we just saw the Grail animation. So most of you have seen these parts. I thought the word Uru, all the names on Earth that's centered around Uru, as in Anaguria, Hungary, I thought Uru meant ancient Draco blood. And the Dracos always sat on the Stargate, so I was almost right. But Elena she said, no, the root of the term Uru is portal, actually. And I see that as a deeper relationship. But you see that Ursprung, Ein Sof Ur, all our names for portal are Durga, for example, Anagur. So, and I showed you the Stargate. So the alignment of the Giza Plateau is just one example here. And this is that Anu 5-spin inside, 7-spin outside shape, which is a sigil of truth in the Ophanian-Enochian alphabet as taught by Vincent Bridges. And this is that same dodecahedron, changing scale without changing ratio, the contact, really introduction to a lucid dream, Jodie Foster's in this case. And this is the 7 spins inside, 5 spins outside. You've seen these videos before. And this is from Vincent Bridges, where you map the alphabet symmetry array called angel names. Here you read down Zafkiel, Zadkiel, Kunael, Raphael. So the Ophanic angel names, which John D. and Kelly pioneered, were actually a name for symmetry operations to embed plasma angelically. This is the name for intelligent plasma, is the physics of angels. And if you take that alphabet system, that array, and extend it out, you have a stellated tetra, rhombic, octarhombic, and what effectively then became their name for the fourth dimensional cube. And then Vincent and I spent the rest of our lives arguing about whether the fourth dimensional cube is a dodecahedron. Because if you tilt the dodecahedron up 32 degrees, the chin angle of the Sphinx, spin, blink 5 times, you have a dodeca. So anyway, so then this leads to the steering tornado conversation that you embed with the heart muscle into the implosion, and that creates the centripetal force named compassion, which allows you to steer the tornado, the physics of the Star Mother kit. And this then is Hermes, the emerald tablet of Thoth. And note, as above, so below, and all the wisdom of Thoth. And note, the language of Thoth became the Bon Po, and the Bon Po is our origin of our word for bonfire. And if you make a bonfire, you're making a Grail cup, literally, right? So that even the Tibetans had a, and this is Thoth, this is our fella. And this is, according to Anton Parks now, what Enki looked like at that time. More like a frog, actually. Today not, but at that time. And I think he's probably right. And this is his mother, Mamita, and there's Anton Parks' book. And I think Anton Parks' books on the history of the Anunnaki are incredible. But the fact he hasn't opened to the bigger picture of what Elena is teaching is actually a bit sad, I think. So this is the Iradia couple in Russia. Basically, they had a form of Draco blood. They mutated toward Draco blood because they had settled too close to, what's the nuclear plant that had the meltdown in Russia? Thank you, thank you. They settled too close to Chernobyl, and their blood mutated to the way Draco blood works, to the way Brown's nuclear battery works. Low-level radioactivity produced a quasi-superconductive effect. That's why the Nazi mercury had to be radioactive. That's why Paul Brown's nuclear battery had to be radioactive. And that's how their DNA mutated to what is the Draco situation for DNA, is low-level radioactivity as a stimulant for them. And since oxygen is a poison for them, and moisture is a poison for them, you go to all the major inhabitable stars around our local neighborhood and you make a plot. If the oxygen is going down and the moisture is going down and the radioactivity goes up, that means the Dracos are winning on that planet. You get it? So they were actually serving their own blood chemistry. That's the history here. And these are Anton Parks' book, and this one, Secret, is excellent in English. This is a serious point which we've talked about many times, but just to review this point. After the Theuba book revealed that after the War of the Sexes of the Draco, in which they lost their soul and long-term memory and ancestral memory, the law was the Draco males, leaders, and the female leaders were required to have a separate language, identical with Aboriginal law today, which is straight Draco. And of course, that's why, basically why Australia is a desert, truly. And when you heal that wound there between the men and the women, my friend Malcolm Borgward, that's what he does. And rainstorms follow him across the continent. Every time he goes through the villages and heals that ancient wound, you can tell the reason Australia is a desert. We know desertification and patriarchy. It's been documented. Patriarchy causes desertification. It's proven. But the physics of how patriarchy causes desertification by inhibiting charge circulation, which is permission to touch. If permission to touch existed in England, you wouldn't have football. Isn't that wonderful? So the reason football exists was articulated by Carl Jung very well. Urge to touch, frustrated, becomes anger by definition. So they needed to push out this poison pellet, sometimes called a turd, which is now today called a football. And was that Roman? Oh, I have been nominated for public relations for the National Football League. No. So if in fact young British males were growing up in Polynesia or coming of age in Samoa, and there was abundant permission to touch, they would not have the urge for football, truly. Yeah. And actually, the coming of age in Samoa, and I knew Gregory Bates and her Margaret Mead's partner later. But anyway, documented that in a matriarchy, permission to touch eliminates the war of the sexes. Absolutely, because there is charge distribution is permitted, and these are always wet climates. Yeah. So anyway, the two different languages required to be separate for the Draco were called Emanita, which became the language of the noble prince, the Sumerian, and Old Egyptian, which I believe, if I got this right, and then the language matrice means female was Emesa, and that language emanated to become the Babylonian priestess, and later was called Akkadim, language Akkaldan, Akkadian, which is specifically documented to be the language Joseph Smith had to study before he could interpret the plasma shadows on the gold plates, which Draco commonly use to store genetic records. Remember, if you're Humpty Dumpty and trying to make an egg, and you don't have the recipe for a soul, you urgently need to make genetic records, hint the Mormons. and so they stored the genetic records by recording the sequence of plasma donut phase angle tilts, burnt into copper and gold foil. And a form of clairvoyance would enable you to perceive the plasma domain longitudinal component on that foil, Urim and Thummim, transparent quartz tetra, with the phase conjugate function, the same reason an obsidian mirror can help you see ancestors. So it's the physics of scrying, actually. And this was the trick that Nostradamus used and John Dee used with the Aztec showstone, which was an originally South American device for seeing ancestors. Anyway, so this split of the language of the tribes becomes indicative of the trauma of Draco history. So in a way, if we're recovering our ancestral memories and healing the pain of our ancestors, we might have to go back to the origin of the Draco to do it. Now, the recent history of this, according to Elena, and I believe her, is that, so Anu regretted for many thousands of years that Draco wife and Enlil Yahweh. But after Enlil Yahweh, the largest plasma parasite in the solar system, probably who we call the Grim Reaper. A vampire. And actually, I think Anne Rice got that right. She said Enkil was the name of the father of all vampires, whose blood had crystallized, actually. And you see, when they saw the Grim Reaper arrive at death, who's eating the souls. Yeah. Anyway, so Anu, the father, Anak, he's not a bad guy. He's still around, and he's a good guy. And he has quite a few galaxies under his belt. But in this case, not in the solar system, in our galaxy, the Draco Siakar ran the show. So after they got a foothold on Earth, like when the Draco paid tall grays, fooled Eisenhower and Truman, so that millions of humans got abducted, mostly the lucid dreamers. You know what kind of DNA there was after? Hint, they didn't have a soul, and we did. This could be our trump card. Let's play it now. So the Dracos tricked Eisenhower and Truman to permitting the abduction, and they didn't accept the help of the Galactic Federation and the Andromedans at that time. I knew Alex Collier quite well, and his piece of the Andromedan history is very useful as well, and we've been in touch even recently. Anyway, so bringing this up to date, which is what Anton Parks has specifically failed to do, I think. Wonderful work, wonderful book. Excellent, detailed history of the Anak Empire. Very detailed, wonderful. English and French. Highly recommend Anton Parks. However, to bring this story up to the date, we need actually Elena Denon, who's doing wonderful work. And so I think most of her information here makes sense to me, which is basically that Anu was afraid to interfere with thousands of years of parasitism of the Draco in the solar system, because the Draco-Seikar could have wiped out the Anak colonies across the galaxy if Anu would have interfered. And he was a responsible leader. He didn't want billions of people dead, actually. But then, after our nukes, when the nukes happened on Earth, and all the ETs showed up immediately after that, you know, Roswell, all of that is a follow-up on the nukes. And whenever you're seeing the ETs flying over and turning off half of the USA's nuclear devices, it's a scream, actually. So the reason they're flying over, switching off half the nuclear devices of the USA, and the government is so afraid to admit it, is because a nuclear device has the capability of ripping up ancestral memories for thousands of years and thousands of light years. It's really serious. I mean, the ETs are serious about keeping them stupid humans away from their nukes. The ETs are serious about that, I'll tell you for sure. Anywho, long story short, so the Galactic Federation arrives and realizes the Draco-Seikar problem here requires intervention. They could no longer keep the prime directive was, thou shalt not interfere. But when somebody already has interfered, hint, Draco, Gray, Nebu, when a massive parasitic outbreak had occurred, the Galactic Federation had gotten stronger. Remember, at the time when the solar system was much younger, at the time of the Lesser Dryad, the Galactic Federation was much weaker, and they tried to eject the Draco and to some extent the Anak, because at that time the Anak on Earth were associated with Draco because Enlil, Yahweh, was ruling the roost. So they were trying to boot the Draco out of the Earth at that time, and that's when they melted down Mars, lost Mars' atmosphere, and blew up Tiamat, the water of which became the Great Flood. And that was a nuke, actually. And the device designed by the Syrians for Enki's family to non-destructively contain the nuke, which we today call Ark of the Covenant, an implosive capacitor, whose implosive capacitance can also stabilize gold in the monoatom state, how they made Holy Communion. So when in the modern day, actually specifically about 2 years ago only, as Elena has well articulated, and I'm grateful for her scholarship on this, when the Galactic Federation, now much stronger, many more star systems have joined. Andromedans were one of the founding members, and what's really a scream is one of the few species in our galaxy that likes to eat Dracos, the Negumak. They joined the Galactic Federation, and then Anu joined the Anak Empire also, and now you got a powerful triumvirate, and they're kicking ass, man. The Dracos are losing in our galaxy. And that's good news, guys. I think Elena's right about this. But the thing is, they were willing to get the ET parasites the hell out of here, but when there was a tick in your arm, you're not finished when you remove the tick, are you? No. If you had a tick in your arm and you pulled it out, you might have more work to do. The memories are in the blood, right? So now, they're saying, well, you ain't got no more ET parasites there, humans, but you're going to need to fix the rest of the mess yourself, actually. And that's where they keep talking about what they call the deep state. Now, I feel that Elena Danaan and Michael Salla refer to the term deep state a little too often without describing exactly who they mean. Obviously, the deep state includes the conventional U.S. military who were scared as hell to admit they lost World War II to the Nazis. Absolutely lost, for sure. Then they had to murder James Forrestal, Secretary of the Navy. And they had problems. And millions of humans got abducted. So imagine the U.S. government saying suddenly, oh, we lost World War II and millions of humans got abducted. I guess we screwed up. Do you think the U.S. government's going to say that? Probably not. And that's actually more directly why Kennedy got wiped. We think that, and actually, Michael Salla did a very good job on that connection, actually. Anyway, but you see the big picture now that what they're calling the deep state needs to be articulated more definitely on those who are not ready to recognize our membership in a larger federation of galaxies. Actually, you know, we got to grow up. It's a long way from downtown, kids. And we need to know this history in order to do the alchemy. And that's kind of the end of our story. The climax of this part of the story is how the physics of ensoulment, and I do mean the physics of how you get a soul, is the turning point in galaxy wars and the main agenda of Enki, Ea, who called this Adam Kadmon. Basically a genetic recipe for making an implosive plasma pod around imploding DNA to make a soul, what you would call ability to lucid dream and taking memory through death. But we now have huge, major new parts of that picture. And this was in part 1 of this lecture. I showed you the DNA recursively braids in the presence of the phonon, the sound low frequencies, from the heart and the brain, the bliss coherent implosive phonon cascade, precisely the same as the Schumann cascade, as the brainwave cascade for bliss, that impinges on DNA in exactly the same way it impinges on a crystal to make it into a fire crystal. So, bottom line is, the recipe to ensoul a species determines the moment when they propagate coherently into the longitudinal array and become centripetal in the longitudinal array, something called Christos. So the ability to crystallize becomes centripetal. Whoever's centripetal in that array is the Christ, right? It's simple. Because that's the crystallizing force. So you can't say who the Christ is unless you know the principle of crystallization, obviously, which is why you'd have to know why something is centripetal. Okay, that leaves out Earth physics. So the ability to become centripetal in the array, the Christ principle, is actually the emergent power here. And that power only evolves, as we said, when humans who have this amazing potential, for example, you call that going to the next dimension. And what you mean by that is the recursive braiding of the DNA has another spin superposed, another harmonic shows up, and the implosion gets bigger, and your field gets bigger, and you propagate into a larger longitudinal array. That's called ascension, going to the next dimension. But it's absolutely pure and measurable physics. Start by spectrum analyzing your DNA and your heart and your brain, and you get a clue. Implosion is highly recognizable there. So the recipe for ensoulment now, it was so cool when we saw the university studies on the harmonics which trigger lucid dreaming, which we now know is related directly to why Therify replicably helps trigger lucid dreaming. It's simply successful compression. And during successful compression, it's like a washcloth that's in a helix, and you're squeezing out the water, so the braid of DNA gets squeezed, and what comes out? The water. It's longitudinal coherence. Charge is a superfluid. So without that squeezing process, the transverse waves don't get squeezed down that vortex, aligned, implode through the Planck threshold, and the toothpaste tube, pinecone kissing noses, works to squirt the longitudinal array coherence, which is what, as we just talked about, that Tibetans called rainbow light body, Gurdjieff called the Kesjan body, the Egyptians called the Ba from the Ka. This is the amount of longitudinal coherence you make, and it is the physics of soul because it what allows you to propagate. Let's put it this way. It means when the Sufi made an echo, if you make an echo that well, it will survive death. It's literally you're starting a tornado inside your synapses, and the tornado gets so ordered and implosive inside the array of your synapses that now that tornado can survive outside. That doesn't happen to everyone. No. Kids with scrambled electromagnetics aren't going to accomplish that. We got to tell them quick. But when that imploding coherence becomes centripetal enough and powerful, then the longitudinal array means you take memory through death and you lucid dream. And that is physicsofsoul.com. That's what, we have dozens of .co's. Yes, dear, go ahead. Yes.
Is there a way to somehow connect this story of ensoulment and crystallization to the Big Bang? So how did the first crystals come up? They emerged. How did they emerge? So can you somehow connect that?
Well, our hypothesis is, and it has to be only a hypothesis, is that The fact that the Planck dimension is the same for 1,000,000 light years in all direction is not evidence of a Big Bang. It's only evidence that waves have to agree or die. And so the propagation of once gravity is created and you start propagating longitudinal, Bearden's definition of a gravity wave, they have to agree or die everywhere. That's why Planck is the same. So I see no evidence of a Big Bang. My humble opinion. Okay? Yes, yes.
One of the first graves of modern humans were found with pieces of gold in Bulgaria, and also the ancient Egyptians had this tradition of putting the bodies of dead individuals in gold coffins.
Actually, and the Tibetans wrapped their saints in thin film of gold also.
So how is this related to this concept of the soul?
Well, let me tell you another story. Vincent explained to me the reason mummy powder was served in every pharmacy in Europe for 300 years was obviously the gold powder content. Okay, but those Egyptians were not eating the gold powder so much. No. You know what it was? Alchemy. I mean, the natron salt is a super dielectric, alchemizing the tissue into a form of gold powder. That's how come mummy powder was in every pharmacy in Europe for hundreds of years. So the Egyptians were obviously making their gold. They understood this process. So when you wrap the saint's body in a thin film of gold, it makes the capacitance implosive and immortalizing, actually. Yeah. Yes. Wait.
Would you agree that the way I see the Big Bang is like the event horizon that occurs like every time in the center of a toroidal field expression?
Yes. Well, event horizon is a very interesting concept there, and I think it is very instructive. I agree that, and Nassim uses that term as well, actually. And the event horizon is a form of a cone. The Hebrews, they called it the flame in the meeting tent, the plasma spiral, named Hebrew alphabet. It formed in a tetra, you know. So the cone event horizon does apply. That's a deep meditation. Thank you. Yeah. Yes. I want to finish this talk, but we can. Let me just do a little bit more. So there was supposed to be a climax here. The climax here was supposed to be, there is...
Tacos.
A taco, yes. No. No, there is, Atlantis was called Thule, after Thoth. It was named for Thoth. Concentric rings of water and land called a capacitor. Implosive. The primary technology, and Elena does this part quite well, was what we later called a fire crystal, now more correctly spelled PHIRE, firecrystal.com. Check it out. So what we are now doing is taking our piezo fire and making fire crystals work, because the phase conjugate pump wave that makes water make longitudinal waves, makes DNA have bliss, and makes quartz crystals become fire crystals is exactly what is only delivered on this planet by piezofire.com. So there I am in one of my many interviews with Elena Danaan, and we're explaining the trident of Neptune, which is actually Poseidon, who is obviously Enki. And Elena has had Enki's trident in her hand on his ship, Nibiru, around Jupiter, we believe it's real. And so the squeezing point in the center, visualize Luke Skywalker's plasma sword, lightsaber, okay? Which is actually, we know how to make one. It's a longitudinal plasma project, actually. It's interferometry microwave, really. But anywho, in this case, when you click the clicker at the center of the trident, and you hear that very loud click, and then your aura is the phase conjugate pump wave in phase with the sharp piezo effect of that phonon stricture of that click, that spring load, and out the end comes this torch, okay, which is a powerful longitudinal directional, okay. This is the physics of the origin of actually the Neptune, the trident, and many pictures of this. And it's also called the double Dorji. Now this leads us nicely to the physics of fire crystals, which is what's in the middle. There is a way to do it, by the way, we believe with the Mercury vortex as well. These are some of the lectures I've done with Elena Danaan, and gratitude to her. So firecrystal.com takes this principle. We had been studying this for years, pyramidwirelesspower.com. The reason pyramids make the longitudinal output, which becomes the global wireless power, if the other pyramids are at longitudinal nodes with the right frequencies. As we said, Tesla did not get the frequencies right or the nodal geometry correct. But the concept was right for global wireless power. But now if you apply that to fire crystal and you put this wave into that crystal. So acknowledgement to Patrick here, who is our co-inventor of firecrystal.com, along with Tufan, which will be the new companion product for piezofire.com. Because Elena's team actually nicely identified the frequency signature. Here's what's kind of fun here, that, did I do this right? That the actual harmonic series, which enables fire crystals to fire, were actually indirectly closely announced by Elena's team. Let's see, oh yeah, here it is. Okay. So I had announced and emailed their team, said, plankfire.com, those frequencies on the left in black, charge collapse perfected, is the way fire crystals work, is the way all zero-point energy devices work. Charge collapse is what makes all of it work, including life force. Later, about a couple weeks later, Dan Willis, Elena's, he's a sweet guy, announced this frequency series here to ignite fire crystals in blue. Do you see a connection? So Elena's team announced, if you want your fire crystal to go, use 10, 20, 30, 50, 80, 130. A simple Fibonacci cascade, as close as possible to approximating what is more accurately plankfire.com. Here you see 11, 19, 30, 49. There's the 50. This is the actual Plankfire frequencies. And these are the frequencies Elena's team announced for their fire crystals. Now they don't have a way of making that frequency series anyway without piezofire.com that I know of. But the point is they didn't admit. They said, oh, well, the ETs told us. Okay. Did they not tell you the principle? Oops. But so the interesting part here is in this history is if you feed this cascade, the phase conjugate pump wave, to a crystal with piezoelectric coupling, and Patrick did the first trials here, and Patrick, you had some result, right? You had you perceived something from the point of the crystal.
Yes, well, a few tests.
Where?
We still have to make more tests.
Yeah.
The main question for now, according to what you are saying, is that we need a special shape of crystal.
Yeah. Yeah, the capstone. The thing is, we now know how to accurately predict what the spectrum analysis has to be. So for the first time, we know the diameters, the height, the length, everything to create a coupled wave shape that implodes. And now let me show you some examples of that. This is how it works in a pyramid. Okay, there's the Schumann cascade in green. That's the power of the pyramid to output that longitudinal. And the thing about the quartz geometry is it's a helix of tetracubes going up a slinky, and that's what makes it piezo. And now if you set the dimensions correct, and this is the major precedent in the West, is the Koski-Frost crystal. It's famous fractalfield.com/propulsion. Let me make this bigger, sorry. And
Do full screen maybe on the top.
yeah.
On the computer.
It's, yeah, you can't read. Well, the print's there is fine. The point is that this is a crystal documented. It made 800 times its own weight in gravity, only after it changed size by about 15 times. It got bigger and then smaller, literally. And you see what non-destructive charge collapse does. You're literally imploding through a black hole. And the book on the Koski-Frost crystal, the first documented fire crystal in Western culture by electrical engineers, the book on that, Glimpses of Epiphany, by our partner, longtime friend, Bill Donovan, now Elizabeth Donovan, you can download at fractalfield.com/propulsion and read the book and study a bit about how that was done. It's a phase conjugate pump wave that implodes scale invariant, and that implosion, you see here, it's the same as the Schumann, the same as the brain waves. It's an implosive cascade. And this gets us to the difference between Fibonacci and golden ratio that Tufan touched on. And you see, what we found was that when Marcel Vogel, and I was there with him when he was influencing the plant polygraph actually, when he was using his breath as the phase conjugate pump wave, because he didn't really know what a phase conjugate pump wave was, and he dramatically did affect the polygraph. So the problem is that, as in Vogel crystals, when the sides are not parallel, you can approximate conjugation, but you can't accurately stabilize. So what you have to do is you have to take a crystal whose sides are parallel. Let's see, oh yeah, here's a crystal whose sides are parallel. There we go. So that crystal's sides are parallel. This is the starship from the Federation locally, and there's the crystal actually, and there's a phase conjugate pump wave going in there, and that's called warp, Scotty. So the symmetry and physics of quartz is a very advanced subject. Here's the Mayer wave, okay. So now that's just a little bit of the background. Yeah, so here is working with tapered versus straight crystals. It is the physics of stabilizing a very particular frequency signature to enable implosion, hence the word fire crystal. So, yes, go ahead, Dan.
Lee, you said a 6-sided. I have a 12-sided.
That would be good.
Logo.
That could work. Yep. Yeah. Now, again, the first step would be a spectrum analysis, which they don't know how to do. You could grab your flame in mind.
Yes. What about inclusions? Because mine was not as expensive as some of the real pure, non-included.
You can, for example, when our wonderful partner, Tony Rodriguez, the SSP experimenter, and I've done many videos with him now, many more about to be published, he used a crystal, a Vogel type, and did the pump wave exercise and focused it on water and had dramatic healing experiences. His girlfriend was like on the death's door.
Yeah, I've seen her in his pictures.
Yeah.
In his own videos.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's the present girlfriend or I don't know which one. But anyway, but the point was that the water is a prime receptor, and as he, for the longitudinal, and as he well documented, and he documented this because he was teaching remote viewing, biggest remote viewing school on the planet might be by now, and he discovered that obelisks from Egypt were a prime remote viewing catalyst. And then he discovered that the position of those obelisks with respect to the water, charging and healing the bodies of water, was the reason the obelisks were at the accurate points in the array, very specific accurate distances from the water. And that was the actual Egyptian skill to charge their water, actually. And when the longitudinal inhabits the water, you got magic. It's fun stuff. Anyway, I have carried on a little bit too long, I think, really. It's 4:06. Yeah, just a couple quick questions. Go ahead.
Can you just link the concept of implosion with fire crystals to Thoth's or Enki's like Ensoulment?
Ensoulment. Yeah, that's the
Are
point.
you trying to reverse the process or like what's
Well,
how do you link the two?
the process is always going inside out. So for example, you got the axis of your crystal, and if you got the spectrum analysis at planckfire.com, that's going to implode charge precisely through Planck. It's literally going to implode through a wormhole like Jean-Charles Moyen teleporting when he made the same frequencies in his brainwave, okay? So that crystal changes size, implodes, and its inertia goes out through the Planck threshold into the longitudinal array. That's implosion, that's working. Now, you said compare that
To the ensoulment that Enki was doing for the healing.
That is exactly the right question, dear. Thank you for asking the exact right question. Good work. Good work. Yes. So when DNA implodes like that, you can inhabit the array much more powerfully, and you're not stuck in what used to be called 3D, okay? You get leverage in larger and larger array. It's exactly the same piezoelectricity, the same physics, the same helix, the same phase conjugate pump wave that makes DNA implode and have bliss. And what we're calling bliss is a charge radiance that inhabits the bigger array. And that's the only physics of ensoulment, for sure.
So the array which Enki inhabits, the dimension that he was inhabiting
Inhabits.
when he was
Yeah. What we used to call God is a sort of childish name for ancestor memory of those who inhabit the array, the dreaming track songline. And none of the ancestors, they're not interested in worship. Hell no. No. What they're interested in is survival memory. If you go to death and you have libraries of survival memory pure principle, you are immortal. If you go to death with only a memory of tax law, you might be in trouble.
So I guess this is a more philosophical question.
Sure.
The concept of the soul, when you speak of ensoulment,
Yeah.
You mean a soul that's connected to the source, that's pure and
Yeah,
consciousness, rather than the soul that everyone gets.
The closer you get to serious plasma density, in other words, the more intense your bliss becomes, you know, Kundalini's burning your tailbone and your crown chakras, you know, I've had a little of that experience myself. And so the closer you get to pure plasma implosion, as it becomes more and more dense, you get connected to larger and larger array function. Larger being bodies, as Gurdjieff would say. And so when you say connected to source, well, that's an introduction to the physics of there's a source here, and then the sun's heart is a source. And then there's a source, the heart of the sun's heart of the sun, heart of the sun, which, by the way, is Sirius B, if you've read The Lost Star by Walter Cruttenden, proving the sun is rotating around Sirius B, and precession's only 24,000 years, and that's why the Dogon knew. Anyway, another story. Yes?
So, are there humans on the planet that don't have souls?
Absolutely, lots of them.
And
It isn't that they're wasted, it's just that the memory after death will not achieve communion. Yeah.
and how would you know? How do you know humans?
The experience where there's crosses with the Greys, for example, very few of those, I think, have what we would call a soul. We need to define soul electrically, or we will become soulless very quickly. Our planet must know what a soul is electrically, or our children are going to be soulless very soon, for sure. Yes, and that basically is the DNA imploding. Ability to lucid dream is a good clue, I think, actually. Yes, yes.
With this crossbreeding and alien DNA,
Yeah.
how does that relate to blood type, particularly Rh-negative blood?
Yeah, we have an article on the website about the relationship for Rh negative dominant in the UK. We only hug our dogs and our horses. Thank you very much. No, but empathy is different there, right? Am I criticizing? No, I wasn't picking it. But it's a little bit simplistic. But the fact that Jerusalem has a map on UK that's well known, goldenmean.info/temple. There's a map of Jerusalem on UK, and that's an Anak empire. And the Anak empire at that time was a big part of it was reptilian. So, and certainly the half of the Anak family that was Draco and Lil Yahweh, you know, that's reptilian for sure. So there are some wonderful and very intelligent reptilian species for sure. But the idea of Rh negative blood, the biology of that has to do with rhesus monkey absent. The rhesus monkey had passion. If the rhesus monkey was not in the DNA, there's less passion. Are you British? Oh, excuse me very much. Pardon?
It's most common in Basque.
In the Basque, interesting. You're right, interesting. So there's a lot of study on that. And that's simplistic, and now with the mixing that's going on. But the core concept that Enki started with the rhesus monkey, actually it's a descendant of Neanderthal and the whole story, but he started because he had never seen iron-based blood before. His was green. The difference between chlorophyll and hemoglobin is one atom that switched out when the humans had to be underground for too many millennia. Their blood turned from green to red. And that iron, Takadam, is why we are named the Adamic race. Adam meaning red. Enki found iron blood fascinating. It's our power because iron can bond to more oxygen. So having that good red blood iron was shocking to him, and he knew we were going to steer the lightning that was going to bend stars. Next question. Yeah.
More a bit of a fun question. You mentioned lightsabers.
Lightsaber.
And thinking of George Lucas.
Yeah.
how you think he was so extremely tapped in? Because we're talking about the Jedi racing the Jedi, talking about Hollow Moon space station. There are tons of
the Death Star.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How do you think he was? Did he have like a vision with him?
Well, I knew Puharich, who taught the writers of Star Trek, and Puharich became Phyllis Schlemmer's group, where what's his name? Wrote Star Trek by learning from Phyllis Schlemmer. Yeah, thank you, Roddenberry. So Roddenberry learned from Phyllis Schlemmer and my friend Andrea Puharich at that time. So that was actual, useful Draco star history that became Star Trek. And that's well researched, especially by Elena. Now, I'm sure there's a parallel to Star Wars. And in fact, just one example, in the Star Wars, if Luke, if Luke basically is the son, Enki, and Darth Vader, the son wakes up and finds out that Dad is half machine. That is true of Dune, Harkonnen versus Muad'Dib. That is true of Star Wars. We just woke up and found that Dad is half machine. Hello. Next question.
So when you say that we are electric fields that became intelligent, and we are a coaxial system of longitudinal that doesn't have waves, because it's a pulse, and Hertzian that has waves, everything that has mass and magnitude loses potential, but our thoughts only uses the longitudinal. So
Well,
that is true of instant action at the distance, meaning that the thought uses the longitudinal without the loss of potential to the Larmor.
Well, yeah, I mean, by inhabiting a longitudinal array, we can do a much bigger array. We can become sustainable, immortal, and what we call non-Hertzian simply is the implosion that results in a longitudinal, actually. But it doesn't mean the thoughts don't have a transverse component. Actually, every tsunami starts out as longitudinal and ends up as transverse. It's just a ratio. But yeah, absolutely. There's a component of both types in every wave. But I think my time is over. But yeah, all right, just quickies. Yes. Yeah.
Since you do not see any evidence about the Big Bang, I will reformulate my question.
Okay.
I will ask the same thing again. The Ensoulment and the crystal, the first crystal, how would you hypothesize about the emergence, the first emergence of the first soul, or the souls at the same time? I mean, I would assume they would all just come up, emerge at the same time.
Well, DNA itself is an example of a wave learning how to turn back upon itself recursively. That's what DNA is. And when a wave turns back on itself recursively, 5 spins inside, it's a dodecahelix, so that's 5 spins. And then you braid the braid of that 5 spins 7 times, you got 7 spins outside. So now you got 12th dimension. 12th dimension isn't actually even the right term, but in the spectrum analysis you could see 7, 12 recursive braid operations. And that implosion creates more leverage on the longitudinal than any structure in the galaxy. Human DNA is an archetype for how to steer and make and bend stars. That's what DNA is for. And that's interstellar, obviously. Yes.
You know, another word for DNA in star language is carbon.
Yeah, well, yeah, carbon is a phase conjugator. Yes, yes. We have to stop soon, guys. Yes.
The idea of not the memory after death, that some certain humans don't keep the memory after death. I have trouble understanding it because it kind of goes against most of the traditional ideas of the afterlife, that the people that did bad things in this life are eternally punished with their memories.
And that's the nature of the array, because the only thing the array is doing is collecting survival memory in a library. That's it. That's what the array is for. That's what ancestral memory is. So if you go in there with a huge amount of survival memory, you're like part of the array. You embed well. But if you go in there with anger, you're not a shareable, not a distributable wave. So that process of so then that means that lucid dreamers who come back and know how to navigate in the dream, they have practice steering in that array. And the vectors, by the way, are literally the plasma shadows of sacred alphabet. Those are your jets. Cool your jets, man. Okay, yeah, I think we have to stop because we got to honor the next speaker. To be continued. Thank you. Bless you.
Can we try lab-grown quartz with fire crystals?